It was remarkable to me because every demo that I attended had some sort of AI code assistant. It was just part of the demo. It's like part of the workflow. The work that developers are going to be doing is going to shift radically in the next 2 years, and in 10 years, I don't think we'll even recognize what it is that they do.
Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools. I'm joined today by Kate Holterhoff, who is a senior analyst at RedMonk. And RedMonk are a developer-focused analyst firm. So thinking a lot about developer tools. Kate, thanks so much for joining.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Could you tell us a bit more about yourself and about RedMonk?
Yes, absolutely. So I am the newest analyst on the team, been at RedMonk for about 2.5 years now. And before that, I was a practitioner. I was a front-end engineer, which I worked at a digital marketing agency for several years. And before that, for a decade, I was an academic. And so I studied 19th century literature and taught at universities. My PhD is from Carnegie Mellon. So I love talking to engineers, taught technical communication at Georgia Tech. And the way that I, became interested in tech was I, not only was surrounded by a lot of engineers at Georgia Tech and Carnegie Mellon, as you can imagine, but also I had a digital humanities project, which was called Visual Haggard. It was a Ruby on Rails archive, and looked at illustrations of a 19th century author named H. Rider Haggard, who sort of invented the Indiana Jones character. And so it was fun. It got to into my interest in art and literature, and allowed me to compare these amazing illustrations that came out in both serial editions and also in book editions. But also, in the process, taught me a lot about web development. And it was hosted on Heroku on the free tier. So sadly, it is no longer available. But it was you can still see it on the Internet Archives, Wayback Machine. But it was sort of my introduction to just what it means to work on a team and to learn about versioning and all those sort of things, which I transitioned into actually working in the industry when I decided to leave academia and quit pursuing my former ambitions to be a professor. I still have a lot of blazers though, so you can't pull those out of my cold dead hands. My corduroy blazers.
Amazing. And so we wanted to talk about today this article that you've written, which is called "Front-End Developers: The Newest New Kingmakers." And I guess you're making the argument that front-end developers are making a lot of the having a lot more influence now than they were a few years ago. So I thought maybe you could share a bit about the article and your kind of reasoning and what it means.
For sure. Well, because my background was in front end, I certainly had some vested interest in reclaiming the title of front end. It became very apparent to me at Christmas parties and elsewhere that if you say that you're a front end developer, folks kind of look at you askance, and they might say, "We don't have front end developers on our team. We only have full stack developers." And so there's this sort of there's a Paul cast over it, and that frustrated me because I knew that not only were the front end developers that I worked with extremely sharp, very talented, kept up with what was going on, but also a lot of the most interesting innovation that I was seeing as an analyst tended to be on the client side. And so there was sort of the domain of folks who were interested in what was actually happening on the front end. And so I think anyone who follows the hype cycle around front end frameworks can see that. But then what I think spurred me to write this actually was I was listening to a podcast with Paul Copplestone, who's the CEO of Supabase. He's been on your podcast, right?
Actually, he hasn't. But Ant has.
Oh, I'm
no,
sorry.
No,
Okay.
You're right. But Ant.
Oh, it's Ant.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Definitely,
okay,
we would
forgive
love
me.
to have Paul
Okay.
on. So
amazing. Yes. Okay. Well, then consider that my invitation from you. So, okay, I knew there was a Supabase connection. All right. Well, he said on that podcast that he was targeting the Jamstack in particular. And I thought that was really remarkable because, for one, it's a database company. So they're not, it didn't seem to me that they would be vested in saying that the front end is worthwhile. I kept having these conversations personally with, back end developers or even like directors of engineering who kind of made it seem like front end developers didn't need to be heated in terms of purchasing decisions. And yet here is the coolest Hacker News Y Combinator startup, talking about how important the front end is. And then I started hearing it all over. And it was about that time that Vercel rebranded as the front end cloud. And I said, this is big. Something's happening here. And so I just kind of went through some of the history that I was seeing. And I date the sort of renaissance of the front end in terms of being recognized as having purchasing power again. So this is a kingmaker in terms of like who's going to make these purchasing decisions. And it seems like in 2019, the article by Chris Coyier called "The Great Divide," he really gets into the transition that's happening with the front end developer as a job, where it's not just a matter of developers who might be junior, who are not able to manage back end infrastructure, but that these front end developers are actually drawn to design. They're drawn to accessibility. They're drawn to all of these really important tasks that need to happen on the client side. And so, and in addition to being drawn to it, just kind of for the exciting reasons of like, this is something that we actually see out in the world. Web development is something that any website is going to show us, but also has that sort of UX factor, which I think a lot of front end developers find appealing. But also, I'm hearing at KubeCon, all the discussion was about WebAssembly. And so I'm saying, well, wait a second, if the compute on the front end is really where all this excitement is happening, and everybody now is talking about, how it is that where the actual, the computation is going to be happening. If that is moving to, the devices themselves, then this is a big shift and actually suggests again that the innovation and the excitement around the front end, it can't be ignored. And so all of this kind of came together with in a 3-part series that I wrote about the future of front end, where I take on the term, I sort of outline my thesis in the first one. The second one, I talk about the history of the full stack developer, because I think that's worth digging into, because again, that is such a big part of how the front end is conceptualized, not only in terms of like the individuals who actually do the work, the developers themselves. And again, at RedMonk, we're all, our concerns tend to be with what the developers are experiencing. But also it got into the sort of labor practices and like, what is included in a full stack, right? Because nobody is wanting to actually manage an entire stack, right? It's too much. And so I was able to find a lot of lights in the industry who discuss that, and was able to pull out why it's sort of a disservice and to the developers to focus on the full stack over saying that the front end is doing some interesting stuff on its own. And then finally, I wrote the final piece on the future of front end, which talks about how we're actually probably going to move away from the term front end. Like that's, the future of front end is that, it's probably not going to be around forever because the entire industry is shifting. And so I'll keep this monologue short here, but that AI is certainly shown us that where the work that developers are going to be doing is going to shift radically in the next 2 years, and in 10 years, I don't think we'll even recognize what it is that they do.
I cannot not dig in on that part. Could you tell us a bit about like where you see it going?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I think it's important to talk about like the API economy when we think about like the future front end. So a big part of what front end engineers do is actually kind of pull together third-party services, right? So, if they want auth, they can use a service like Supabase because it's included as part of the package. And so that's what makes it appealing, is that it takes away the fiddly bits of back-end engineering and makes it so that these front-end engineers can focus on the work that they actually enjoy doing. And so the future of front end is going to sort of further that, where, again, we're moving away from managing all these complex parts. And so moving to more managed services, moving to more serverless solutions, moving away from having these front-end engineers waste their time. I mean, I talked to some who were working on YAML files. Can you imagine? Because, they had to, right, they don't want to be doing this, but they kind of get pulled into it, right? So we're going to move away from that and let the automation and AI handle some of these more complex just like, I don't know, I have a hard time coming up with a better word than fiddly, but yeah, just like the parts of the backend and ops space that that have historically, made engineers want to pull their hair out, right? So moving away from that and allowing them to focus on the parts that they enjoy, which is like, thinking through the user experience. And, even, when I was a front-end engineer, I could just lose hours when I was building out a web page, and in ways that I am not able to just lose myself in other tasks. So there is this sort of magic to working on coding that I think is going to be enabled by just being able to get up and running, right? So I think that the future front end is going to be focused on that, but more and more. That's what we're going to see increasingly happen. And then AI code assistance. I mean, that's going to be a big part of every developer's work practices from now on. I was at DevNexus recently, and it was remarkable to me because every demo that I attended had some sort of AI code assistant, and they weren't like making a big deal about it. It was just part of the demo. It's like part of the workflow. And I just thought that was, tremendously interesting that, they're just taken for granted now. And so it's super curious to me too, when I talk to companies who are like, oh yeah, well, my company hasn't invested in an enterprise Copilot plan yet, but we're all using it. And I'm like, well, really? Maybe that's probably, a little problematic. And so when we think about the Kingmaker idea, which my colleague and the co-founder of RedMonk, Steve O'Grady, coined about a decade ago, and he was thinking mostly of the back end. His sort of go-to example is Slack at IBM, where they started using it among the developers, but it wasn't, immediately made. It wasn't sort of like given to them from the C-suite, right? It wasn't like, hey, we're going to all start using Slack. It was that, hey, all the developers are using Slack. I guess we need to invest in Slack, right? This is something that we're all, just using as part of our internal communication. Folks need to pay attention to what the developers are doing. So that, I think, is what we're going to see happening more and more among front-end engineers who are interested in sharing that burden, getting away from just being considered like a jack of all trades in terms of like a full stack developer, but able to focus on the things that they actually are interested in doing. And I can give some more examples of what that can look like. I was at Render ATL and saw a few demos actually that sort of dug into that concept as well.
Yeah, one of the questions I have is like this kind of where this, like what stage we're at in this kind of like change. Because I guess you talk about there's like the kingmakers of like developers in general. And then there's like front end within that as like a subsection. It sounds like are both of those like kind of mature, or is it like something that's still like actively growing where front end developers are getting like more influence?
It's absolutely still happening. I think what's interesting about the front end too, in that, so I guess we could even include some of the design tools like Figma, that are obviously, Figma just had their big conference as well. And so they made a big deal about their own AI components. And I think we're going to be seeing a muddying of the work that the designers do and what the front end engineers do. When I was a front end engineer, there was a sort of elaborate pass off or handoff procedure from the different teams. So on the interactive team, we'd start with the UX designers, right? They'd come up with their wireframes and they'd pass it to the design team, right? Who would make it into a PNG file that had the colors, swatches all mapped out, and then they would choose the images that needed to go in, et cetera. And then they would hand it to the front end engineers, and then the front end engineers would code out that PNG file. And so, that's 3 different teams that were involved. And I think what we're seeing, the future is going to be smooshing them all together. And so, one sort of deciding individual is going to be able to do all of them. And so one of the things that I I know Vercel is working on is this little sort of fun AI hobby project called VO, which is, you use natural language to type out what it is that you actually want. You're like, okay, well, I want, a card that is going to look like a Twitter card, and it'll have these different sections on there. And of course, I want the text centered, et cetera. So, and natural language can do that for them. And so, the UX engineer, the UX designer could do this. The designer could do this, or the front end engineer could do this. Frankly, the management team could do this, right? The project manager. And so the capabilities of folks who don't have the ability to code themselves is going to just broaden, right? I don't know. It's a really strange and exciting time. So I don't know. I guess I don't have all the answers. I don't have a time machine. Can't go shooting ahead. But I'm seeing what I'm seeing is that it's happening now. It's happening fast, and companies are taking advantage of it. Yeah, Figma's AI abilities were able to was it copy Apple's weather app, right? I mean, it's amazing, and they look great.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and it's like the analogy is like, well, the front end kind of became more powerful in the sense of like decisions, but then also like they can do so much on their own as like with Firebase, with Supabase, and like okay, just have one front end developer, and they built the whole project more or less. Maybe still need a designer, and then what you're describing there around like product managers, designers. So is it kind of like just heading to one like startup, quote unquote, like startup person that just does the whole thing? And
Yes, I think so. I mean, the ability of a small team to accomplish more is only going to increase. And so, I mean, the term that I haven't used but could have sort of characterized this entire sort of description is abstractions, right? Front-end engineers have always relied on abstractions, right? They even work at the top of the stack, in terms of like writing a language that's further away from from the computer, right? So we've got JavaScript being their language of choice, right? Python. And so all of these solutions are going to further create these abstracted ways of managing apps. And and front-end engineers are more okay with it than back-end engineers have been historically. That's not always the case or universally the case, but in the past, I mean, gosh, when I was building websites, we would use page builders even. I mean, that's basically low code. We were dragging and dropping sections, and it felt right, because we understood that the marketing folks who were going to be using these websites needed to have the ability to manage them without having to mess around with the code, especially after WordPress got through with it, right? So there's ways that the front end is following them can not only kind of be a good weather vane in terms of what's happening in the industry, but is also a very good market to target because they're willing to pay for abstracting away the pain of managing these services. So Vercel, right? I mean, it's just a wrapper around AWS, but nobody wants to manage their AWS, right? Well, not nobody. Front-end engineers don't want to do it. And Vercel makes it so easy to spin up an app quickly because they handle all of that for them. And of course, the issue of like black box solutions being bad and nobody wants to not have visibility into what sort of errors they're getting, right? I mean, black boxes, front-end developers understand that these are problematic and they are hyper aware of lock-in, the dangers with that. And the scaling, right? That these sort of solutions don't always scale. So they get it. But if it's as a startup, a lean startup, like you mentioned, where you've got like a team of one, that's okay. They get their app going quickly, and get their VC funding, all of that, and then they can expand the team. Then they can recreate their app and host it directly on some of the cloud providers.
That makes sense. And I think that really aligns with like how I've seen Supabase and others like kind of market themselves. I think Supabase is like actively saying, build in a weekend, scale to millions, and like, yeah, it definitely aligns with how you've described it. So I guess there's companies like Supabase, there's like Auth. What other kind of dev tools spaces are like kind of benefiting from this rise of people doing it themselves?
They're coming out all the time. Zephyr Cloud is one who is targeting micro front ends. But even so, any company that I hear on, if I listen to like JS Party, or I'm a big podcast person, so forgive me if my examples tend to be podcasts. But so I'm thinking of like the Sunil Pai from PartyKit. Before his PartyKit was acquired by Cloudflare, he was on JS Party talking to front end engineers and explaining why real time is pretty cool. Why front end and developers might want to create apps that leverage Cloudflare's primitives, which in that case was durable objects, which allowed them to create these sort of project apps that allow for multiple users to edit something at the same time. So the way that a Figma file is, or like a Google Doc or something. And gosh, when I talked to Chris Anderson, his Fireproof, I know that they're very interested in what they're seeing in the front end space and targeting those users, because they just use a script tag for their database project. So those are the sort of vendors that I've talked to, but gosh, there's so many. If I could get my Rolodex up here and give you a longer list, but anyways, those are a few good examples.
Yeah, that's very cool. And how do you think like companies thinking to like kind of start in that market, like what things matter to front end developers and might have been less important with kind of back end developers?
Yeah, so I think they, certainly elevating the developer experience, making sure that getting the mean time to hello world is as short as possible. Also having a tinkering option so that they can kick the tires, so a free tier, right? And I'm a big fan of having a free tier that is just low in terms of rate, but doesn't have like a time limit. I think that anytime there's a time limit, nobody wants to invest in actually building like a little, like a website for their wedding or something. They want the permanence of like a Vercel, which allows you to create a little static web app that isn't going anywhere. So I would say speaking to them directly as well. So if you're only talking about full stack developers, they're not always hearing themselves addressed there. And also thinking about the JavaScript ecosystem. So they're going to be aware of their own sort of toolkit. So even if your product is built with Rust, talk about the integrations with TypeScript, JavaScript, some of these frameworks. Make sure that you've got some SDKs that integrate with the tools that they're already using, so that they have an on-ramp to discovering what it is that that their tools can accomplish. And I'd say that there's some sort of ineffable things as well. And I love joking around about how Vercel, of course, has their like cool black t-shirt vibe. And so, so I'd say front-end engineers, for good or ill, tend to be a little more design focused. And so they do notice if you've got a landing page that doesn't look like it's been updated in 10 years, right? So make sure that you get like a slick design on your web page that demonstrates that not only are you keeping up on the docs, that you're actually going to maintain whatever project it is that you want them to adopt, but also that you have a sensibility that aligns with them. They're just, they are attracted to a good user experience as well as an attractive one.
Yeah, I guess Vercel is like very, it's everything is Vercel. Mm-hmm. Black t-shirts. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's super, super interesting. And how about the crowd that like the kind of next level of the crowd? If you're, is it too soon to actively just be selling to people that are gonna use V0, like this kind of like empowered product managers or like
Well, I'd say you'd want to target the product managers then rather than maybe the front end developers if you're trying to bypass them already. I would say that the closest that we have to that today would be the low code, no code solutions. Or what do they call, there's so many vendors have different words for it, but like pro code, no code. Yeah. Um, Needless to say, the developers tend to be a little antagonized by that. Front end developers less so. Again, I of all the RedMonk analysts, I'm the most like okay with no code and low code. Like I'm, it doesn't scare me. I'm okay with it. I get the problems with it, that you're locked in, that there's it's a black box, that you don't know what you're doing. But I see that the benefits of like using a Zapier or something like that, where you can just drag things around and create these flows, and the time savings are worth it to me, because actually these apps can become ephemeral. I think one of the benefits in my mind of AI is for not necessarily just developer productivity, but for developer happiness. And I remember talking to some engineers who would work on these internal projects for 6 months, and then the product manager would change, and their app would get thrown away. They would never see the light of day. And this is more of a pain that I think ops and back end developers have than front end engineers, because a front end engineer typically, especially at the digital marketing agency I worked at, our websites would be launched, within a few months, right? I would see the results of the work that I did, as would the entire interactive team. That was less the case for folks who are working at a large, say, an insurance company or something, that are toiling away on these maybe a digital transformation project or something, some sort of internal app that only folks on the inside are going to see anyways. But if it gets thrown away at the end, it's like, I mean, what a morale lessener. I mean, it's terrible. So I hate those stories, and I love the thought that AI and automation are going to enable that sort of pain to be lessened, because you can create these more ephemeral apps and then break them down more quickly. And even product managers who might have an idea of what they want, instead of having to waste a lot of resources on building out different prototypes, they can build their own prototype. They don't have to waste anybody else's time. They can try it out themselves, and maybe they like it, maybe they think it works, maybe they don't. And I mean, there's that adage that if you're starting a company, you throw away the first project, right? The first draft, and rebuild it. That's going to become only more easy as these tools become available. But yeah, I'd say in terms of if folks are trying to market a low code or no code tool, sure, developers might be on board. I mean, it sort of depends on the use case. But I would say targeting the product team, the designers, the UX team, that would be where you're probably going to have more benefit. That's more of the audience that would be receptive to those tools.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. As you were talking, my brain was just thinking, yeah, like it's the kind of, as a developer, your work is always like driven by some kind of a business case, or if you're a founder, you have something you want to solve, and it's like that is never going to go away, or that's going to be like the last thing that goes away. But everything that's kind of like downstream from that, maybe you need someone to like manage a database. Like these kind of things are like sort of, they're definitely needed right now. And everyone knows how the real world is like complex. It's not realistically going to go away, but in a sense, like it could, if you don't inherently need someone, there's not like a job to be done of like manage a database. It's like, it's required because of the complexity of the project. But if these things become like much more like out the box, where like a product manager can just like type in like what they want and then it exists, then it's like, yeah, it's definitely interesting. It feels like that's the future-proof way to go, maybe. I don't know.
It's a paradigm shift for sure. And, I think we're getting glimpses of it. But it's hard to know. And of course, there's a lot of like cynicism around it too. I talked to Todd Gardner, who you were asking about some other companies that target front-end engineers. He's a CEO and founder of Track.js and Request Metrics. And so he, again, is very much interested in what front-end engineers are up to. But, he talked to me a little bit about like the build step and how front-end engineers sometimes are a little too driven by the hype cycle, that they're a little too interested in just what's cool and maybe making things overly complicated. And so I think that those sort of cycles are going to continue. But being aware that there's a lot of business cases that are happening behind the scenes. But that, front-end engineers are, we're all going to become a version of that at some point. And I don't know what the new term would be, but if we all become front-end engineers, then nobody is one. And so we're going to need some sort of, maybe it's just a developer. Like maybe we all just are going to be, developers at some point, dragging and dropping on our little studios and, with our Figma files and, deploying to Vercel and everything's just easy, right? We don't actually have to look at a line of code.
Yeah, wow, that would be like... That I could totally see that happening. And then there's like, we'll all kind of like look down on people that don't write code, that are developers. And it'll be like, that'll be like
that's right.
Kind of like, hey, we were writing the code. And then everyone's like, we don't need to.
I just type it in. I type it into ChatGPT. I want a personal website.
Yeah.
I want to create an e-commerce site. Here's maybe a few sites for inspiration. Done. Yeah.
Interesting.
Easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Kate, I think we're coming to the end of the time that we've got, but if you had any kind of advice to DevTools founders, DevTools kind of thinking about like the future, what would you share?
All right. Well, I'll just, I'll toe the line here that don't discount the front-end engineers. They're smart. I'd say that they're on the vanguard of the future, and they've got more and more purchasing power. They're the ones that are making a lot of these decisions, and I think that they're at the cusp of some of the most innovative things that are happening in web apps today.
Amazing. And where can people learn more about you and about RedMonk?
We of course have a website, so you can follow us there, and I have a blog, obviously. So. Where you can follow some of my musings and my research. But also we have our own podcast called The Monkcast. And then, of course, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I'd love to connect with folks on either of those platforms.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Kate. And thanks so much for listening, everyone.